Ein is still trying to wrap his head around what he's seeing, but then a woman appears behind him and demands that Ein show proper gratitude and drink the tea that the girl made for him. Ein is confused since he hasn't seen any tea, but then he notices the girl Yuri holding a cup of tea that she made specially for him. Ein is hesitant to drink mysterious tea that could potentially contain some body fluid, but Ursula forces it down his throat anyway, so it's not like he had much of a choice. However, it turns out that the tea actually tastes really good, so Ein tells Yuri as much, and she's really glad he likes it. Ein thinks Yuri looks really cute when she's happy, but Ursula warns him that she'll erase his entire existence if he has even a single lewd thought about Yuri. Ein gets the message, so moving on, he asks if it was the two of them who saved him from the death bear. Ursula tells him she had no interest in protecting a smelly human like him, but Yuri kept begging her to save him, so she had no choice. Ein thanks Yuri for caring about him, and Yuri gets a little embarrassed, so Ursula drop kicks him in the face and starts stomping him out for flirting with her daughter. Ein is shocked to hear that Ursula is Yuri's mother, but to be more precise, Ursula is actually Yuri's guardian, and it's been that way ever since she first planted her roots here. Yuri may look human, but she's actually this world tree, one of 9 that exist in this world, so Ursula was tasked with watching over her and defending Yuri against any potential threats. Ein is surprised to learn that Yuri is the world tree spirit, but it makes sense to him since she's so beautiful. But immediately after he says that, Yuri gets embarrassed again, so Ursula kicks him to the ground for daring to look at Yuri with such lecherous eyes. Ein apologizes, but speaking of eyes, he realizes that he can still see despite getting one of his eyeballs torn out by the death bear. Ursula explains that she healed him using the tears of the world tree, but even with the healing ability of the tears, they still can't restore a crushed eyeball, so Yuri generously asked her to use part of the world tree to make a new eye for him so he could see. Ein is once again really thankful, but he's starting to wonder why Yuri was so concerned about him in the first place when they barely know each other. She tells him it's because he thanked her when he fell down here. It's rare for people to end up here, but there have still been a handful of incidents of people falling to their doom, and Yuri would always save them, but they would never thank her. And as soon as those people realized that she was the world tree, they would selfishly begin collecting her water and even tearing off Yuri's branches and leaves so they could sell them for profit. However, Ein was the first person to treat her with respect, so she took a liking to him. But be that as it may, Ein isn't supposed to be here, so Ursula tells him to hurry up and leave. Yuri pleads with Ursula not to kick Ein out since he's bound to die if he heads back into the dungeon, but Ursula doesn't care what happens to him. Yuri does care though, so she pleads with Ursula to at least find a way to guarantee that Ein can make it home safe and sound. However, there really isn't much Ursula can do to help him. Since she is the world tree's guardian, she isn't allowed to get too far from the tree, so escorting Ein to the surface isn't really an option. And teleportation magic doesn't work in this dungeon, so she can't use that either. Yuri is devastated that there's no way to keep Ein alive, so she breaks down in tears, but Ursula can't stand to see her cry, so she comes up with an alternative to make sure Ein makes it home safely. She turns to him and yells that she will personally train him until he is strong enough to make it out of here on his own. Yuri thanks Ursula for agreeing to help, and Ein is even more thankful, since he had thought he was going to die here for sure. He hugs both Ursula and Yuri, but Ursula doesn't like all this affection, so she pulls him away and warns him that he's about to receive hellish training from one of the world's greatest sages, so he had better take this seriously since she won't tolerate laziness. Ein understands and swears that he will do his best, but when Ursula leads him outside so they can begin their training, Ein starts to worry that she might just force him to fight monsters on his own. Just then, Ursula informs him that she indeed expects him to fight monsters on his own because that's the quickest way for him to learn. To start off, she says she wants him to fight that gremlin way over there, but Light can't actually see anything in that direction. Ursula reminds him that his eye has been replaced with a piece of the world tree, so he should try making use of it a little. But even with his tree spirit eye, Ein still can't see shit. Ursula tells him he just lacks the awareness of what his spirit eye is truly capable of, so Ein takes a moment to think about how he lost his eye, and how Yuri helped him restore it. And by the time he opens his eyes, everything seems a lot brighter. Now that Ein can finally see clearly, Ursula says it's time for them to begin his training, so she tosses a rock at a nearby gremlin, and tells Ein that his first task will be to learn how to dodge the gremlin's high-speed attacks. Ein doesn't think that's possible since the gremlin is moving way too fast for him to keep track of, but Ursula tells him he just needs to use his appraisal skill to scan the gremlin's movements. Ein doesn't think it works that way, but he doesn't have many options, so he tries it out, and to his surprise, he really can see the gremlin's moves now. Although it's pointless if he forgets to dodge. Since Ein is injured, Ursula puts up a barrier and pulls out a bottle of tree drops she borrowed from Yuri. She pours it on Ein's severed ear, and after it has been reattached, she tells him that he had better take this seriously, otherwise he's going to keep getting sliced up. She then drops the barrier and the gremlin attacks him again, but since he knows where it's going to attack, he manages to duck out of the way in time. After a week of constant training, Ein has finally gotten the hang of appraising the gremlin's moves and can dodge its attack every single time. He proudly tells Ursula that he has mastered the technique, but in the process he lets his guard down, so the gremlin is able to sneak up from behind and slashes his back. Ursula creates a shield around the two of them so they can take a break, and she gets a good laugh from seeing Ein's pain. But she admits that he did do a good job at dodging, so she says he has passed the first test. Now they'll move on to the next lesson. So she tells Ein that he has to defeat that gremlin. Ein is willing to try, but he doesn't have a combat job, so killing an S-rank monster will be impossible for him. Ursula already thought of that, and while it certainly would be impossible for Ein if he were fighting with his bare hands, he doesn't have to since Ursula made a special sword for him. Ursula didn't want to make this for him, but Yuri went through all the trouble of snapping off one of her branches because she wanted to help him. Ein is deeply touched that Yuri would put herself through such pain just to help him, so he is really grateful and swears to make good use of it. Ursula undoes the barrier and leaves Ein to face the gremlin, but when he tries to strike at it, the gremlin easily dodges him. Ursula jokes that he's never going to hit the gremlin if he swings so slowly, and Ein is aware of that, so he decides to just predict the gremlin's path and attack it when it gets close to him. However, when he tries to do that, the gremlin just jumps over him because it's not stupid. If it sees Ein try to attack it, it's obviously going to try to dodge, so Ein needs to think of a new strategy. Instead of simply appraising the gremlin's movements to predict its attacks, Ein needs to appraise every facet of the attack itself, so he digs deep and performs a super appraisal as the gremlin charges at him. As he does this, the gremlin seems to freeze in time, but in reality, Ein is just seeing it move in slow motion since his eye is appraising it at such a high speed. And with such a clear view of the gremlin's movements, Ein is easily able to prepare himself and whack it in the face, finally defeating it. Ein is really happy that he just defeated his first monster, but Ursula reminds him that now isn't the time to be celebrating since he's just getting started. For the next part of their training, she tells Ein that he has to defeat over a dozen more gremlins, and Ein is confident that he can handle it, so he gets right to work. After several hours of fighting, Ein is finally done taking out all the gremlins, so he turns to Ursula, expecting to be praised, but she says this much should be normal for someone who can harness the power of the world tree. With that said, Ein has been making steady progress so far, so she thinks he is ready for the next step. She tells him to appraise the gremlin's ability and make it his own, but Ein doesn't understand what she means since appraisal only shows him information about skills. Ursula points out that humans learn skills through constant practice and with his spirit eye. Ein should be able to see not only the information of the skill, but also receive all the experience that comes with it. With this method, it is possible for him to learn a skill instantly, so he decides to try it out and appraises the gremlin's skills. Just then, Ein gets a massive headache as a ton of information rushes into his head all at once. He falls to his knees in pain, but once the headache finally subsides, he acquires the gremlin's high-speed movement skill. He still finds it hard to believe that he learned a skill so quickly, so he decides to test it a little and takes off running down the dungeon hall. Ein is amazed by how fast he's moving since he's way quicker than he used to be, but there's just one problem. His body isn't used to running at this speed, so after a few seconds, every muscle fiber in his body is way torn to pieces. Ursula catches up to him and pours some of the teardrops to heal Ein's broken body. If his body can't handle all that force right now, then he's just going to have to keep practicing until he eventually adapts. Ein's muscle fibers keep tearing each time he runs, but thanks to the tears, Ursula just keeps healing him over and over, until at one point his muscles stop breaking altogether. He now has a strong body and an acceleration skill, so Ein wonders if he might be strong enough to challenge the Death Bear as he is now, but Ursula tells him he'd still get demolished if he tried to pick a fight with it as he is now. He may be faster and nimble, but he still lacks the necessary attack power, so Ursula decides to let him copy one of her own abilities. Ein is excited to hear this, so he asks Ursula what her ability is, and she demonstrates by immediately blasting him with a fireball. Ursula's ability is called Discard Enchant, and it allows her to use magic without needing to spend time on a chant. Ein thinks that ability is super strong, so he can't wait to learn it, but Ursula will only allow him to appraise it if he does it while she launches a fireball at him because she thinks it's fun. Ein appraises the attack and manages to learn the Discard Enchantment spell, but then Ursula hits him with the fireball, so he falls to the ground in agony. After being healed yet again, Ein begins training to learn how to use magic without incantations, but since he doesn't have a magic-oriented class, his mana reserves are abysmally low, so he runs out of magic energy really quickly. Fortunately, whenever he is healed with the tears, it replenishes his mana and simultaneously, increases his magic capacity a little, but he's going to have to keep practicing for a long time if he ever wants to master the technique. After half a month of magic training, Ein has learned how to cast mid-level magic and is now capable of shooting more than 1,000 fireballs simultaneously. With this combined with his new skills and buffed appraisal ability, Ursula thinks Ein is finally ready to face another death bear. In all honesty, Ein is a little nervous about facing such a powerful monster on his own, but Ursula assures him that if he uses all the techniques she taught him, then he should easily be able to handle it. As Ein confronts the bear tries to slash in with its claws, but Ein appraises its movements, and before it could hit him, he counters with the point-blank wing cutter spell. The spell does a lot of damage to the bear, but it ultimately isn't enough to kill it, so Ein begins firing fireballs, and he keeps going until the bear falls over dead. That fight was way easier than Ein thought it would be, so he starts wondering if the bear was always this weak, but in reality, he just became really strong.